mean, I've been educated this morning and really well informed through all of the sessions. We are short of time, but it's been suggested to me that we might take questions until 1:10, if people are agreeable to that, and then you can have your sustenance at 1:10. Tom.
Thanks very much. My name is Tom Healy from the London Economic Research Institute. Just as a matter of fact, following a really excellent series of presentations this morning, including the main TASC report, I think it's useful maybe just to take a little bit of a reality check. And what I mean by that is that the government has announced $2 billion in income tax cuts spread out over 3 years, with approximately 750 million by way of give back to taxpayers in the coming budget. Now, I calculate that €2 billion over 3 years would fund, and that's an annual recurring figure, it would fund an excellent early childhood education system at a cost of about $1 billion. It would make a huge difference, the remaining $1 billion, to waiting lists in hospitals for outpatient treatment, for example, and also in reducing child poverty. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, and I'm subject to correction on this, no political party is contesting the idea and the practice of income tax cuts, and no civil society group that I am aware of is publicly contesting this policy. Now, if I'm wrong, someone can enlighten me.
I think it's kind of inevitable in think tanks that are primarily driven by economics, economists with great ideas and great concern, that the solution to inequality has been presented to us in terms of growth. And Nat and Cormac listed some of the advantages of growth. But it's avoiding an important elephant in the room. And Nat just mentioned the fact that there's an increase in the numbers coming into primary schools. There's young people in our society who we are going to hand over a inheritance that is damaged because of growth. We're not addressing this. An awful lot of the growth, I think, in my opinion, is producing goods and services that do we really need them? I seriously question that. Just in terms of putting a little bit in context, it's 50 years since the 4.5-day week was brought down to a 5-day, 40-hour week in Ireland. My father was amongst other people who went out on strike for that. And in that 50 years, the average working week has come down by 1 hour. It's a nonsense what we were doing. We are talking in terms of resolving inequality, in terms of putting people into jobs to produce, well, in a lot of cases, a lot of rubbish. And I think TASC has done, now, I'm raising an issue that I don't expect us to address today, but TASC has done a good job in inviting Diane to throw light on an elephant in the room that is often not highlighted. We can easily get, and I do it myself, I get involved with my own students about statistics and about distribution and that. But we need to look at the quality. Diane actually talked about let's hand on a caring society, not just only a more equal society. I'd suggest that what TASC should do for next year is to include the issue of the environment, because just growth alone it might be only a temporary solution, but in a generation or two's time, we will have a very damaged earth, and equality will probably not even be on the agenda, it'll be survival.
For sure, we're looking at a situation where if you just went all out for GDP growth, you're likely to have more economic damage, environmental damage, which will come back as cost down the road. So certainly, in my presentation, I wanted to, in my choice of indicators, I think we can't ignore GDP and our other economic measures, but we know they're deeply flawed. We've known from the beginning that they were deeply flawed, but they still have some use because they correlate with things that we do want, such as employment. But nonetheless, I absolutely agree, we need to look at resource depletion, climate change, and all these other factors, because we know that climate change is going to hit in hardest to people who have the least resources. First of all, in developing countries, And what we're likely to see in relation to climate change first is the waves of migrants increasing into Europe, because we're going to be later affected by climate change. And of course, it's the nasty politics of migration, in fact, and our unwillingness to share our wealth and our welfare systems that's likely to be our first real encounter with climate change. And so absolutely, I would agree, this and lots of other factors certainly need to be taken into account.
Okay, can I ask to pass it to Jim and then this lady at the front?
Good afternoon, I'm Jim Clarkin from Oxfam. And first of all, just to thank TASC for regular collaboration with ourselves and for being the intellectual fuel, I think was the word you used, for many of us in tackling some of these issues. I'd also like to thank Diane for the specific presentation in relation to the gender question. And we produced a report last year that said that it would take 75 years at our current trajectory for women and men to reach the same level of income, which is absolutely shocking, 2 generations. And last year also we produced a report leading into Davos and the World Economic Forum about the gross inequality at the highest level in the world, where the 85 wealthiest people in the world, which is about the population of this room, I guess, own the same amount of wealth as the poorest half of the world, 3.5 billion people. And I think some of the issues that have come up today and the solutions are really interesting, but a lot of them focus understandably here and in this part of the world. But one of the areas that I didn't think was touched on, I think maybe you might reflect on it if you would, is, and because you've talked very much about income tax being one of the key solutions, or certainly a very important part of that. But what we have identified through our research is that developing country governments lose about 120 billion euros a year through lack of tax revenue because of tax havens and tax avoidance by corporations and by wealthy individuals. So even though this is quite a sensitive matter in Ireland, the whole issue of corporate tax avoidance really goes to the heart of this. And yes, of course, we need to more evenly distribute the tax burden on individuals in society. But what about the question of corporations?
Just on the role of, I think, first of all, to deal with the question of growth, we're not saying that growth is a solution to inequality. And in fact, what we're saying is that in the way things are going, growth is going to produce more and more inequality. And growth isn't one of the indicators that we use. So I don't know if you were saying that we were using growth as a solution. We're not. But it's part of the story. On the issue of income tax, I don't think we just wanted to put the income tax story up there to form the debate. I don't think we see rising levels of income tax on low-income earners as being a key to addressing inequality either. But one of the things about corporation tax, actually, ironically in Ireland, is that because we have this low rate, and because we have, as you said, the financial flows coming into Ireland and away from developing countries, is that we actually raise quite a lot of money from corporation tax. And that means that we can have a low-income tax country. So you're right to bring it up as it's about looking at the tax system as a whole. And as we have this debate about corporation tax, are we going to end up in a situation where we get less and less corporation tax if the rules improve? And that'll make us an even lower tax country, and we will definitely have to address other areas of taxation. But it isn't just about income tax. Income tax is only 40% of all our total tax take. We also have VAT, excises, and they take up a huge amount. And we have, again, all the facts and statistics about the tax system are in the paper.
Just a few words. I'm glad you mentioned tax havens. It was something that I was going to mention, but I chose, just given my limited time, to focus on trade and investment agreements, because I think they are also an important dimension of this, but certainly the lost revenue from tax havens is critically important. In your work on the very rich, and we do versions of that. We did something called The Rich and the Rest of Us back in 2010, which looked at the growth in the income of the 1%. This was before the Occupy movement, and they certainly the Occupy movement in Canada used our work and really helped to kind of promote it. We do an annual report on the 100 highest paid CEOs in Canada to highlight that so there's 0.001%, and we do it in ways to really bring it home to people. put it on a timeline, and so in the first day back at work after the Christmas holidays, the average of the top 100 CEOs will have made what the average worker it takes to make in a year. And so that really accentuated. But we don't work just